So here we're going to kind of continue the discussion about focal point from the last tutorial. In this movie, we're going to look at reframing shots. I did this a lot in the Assurance. When I'm in post-production, I often find that I could make things better if I just can tweak the framing a little bit. And for the Assurance, we shot it in 4K and had a 1080 export, which means that our footage was 4 times larger than it needed to be. That gave us a lot of room to push into sections of clips or to reframe things. This also became important because when we shot the film initially, I wanted a standard widescreen aspect ratio. But it wasn't until post-production that I fell in love with the 2:3:5 aspect ratio and wanted to use that. But those black bars often covered up important elements in the shot. So let me show you some of the ways I reframe shots in the edit, and hopefully this will help you to think more creatively when your footage size is larger than your export size. In this first example, I have this shot of Cordelia in the goodbye scene. And this is kind of like the last shot that we see of Cordelia, at least in close-up, as Tayani is saying goodbye to her. So this is really where we get the emotion of her being abandoned. And again, I shot a little bit wide here, and I really wanted to feel that emotion more intensely, and it's hard from this distance. So I went ahead and I scaled up the clip, and I don't know, let's say maybe 120%? I think we could do more than that, maybe 150%. Now these are low-res proxy files that I've included with the exercise files of the course. And so these are already 100%, so scaling up is going to make them look worse. But in real life, I had 4K media, and I actually had to scale them down to make them fit in the clip. So this was just a very slight bump up to about 70% scale in real life, but here it's 150%. So it's definitely going to degrade the image. Now I'm going to move this over on the x-axis, on the y-axis, and I could reframe this however I want to now that I'm zoomed in a little bit. So whereas before, if I click this little reset effect for the motion, the whole entire effect, we can see this is the original. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit undo to see how we pushed in. So it's a totally different shot. It's much more of a portrait of this girl rather than just kind of the scenery, which takes up so much visual space. It has a lot of weight, this river does, and her sadness doesn't take up that much weight. But if we undo this, then we can adjust this to scale up, push in, and this is a much more potent shot. We feel her sadness and her anguish much more because it's really in our face. And again, I love this, and I find myself actually shooting differently because of this. I'll often shoot a little bit wider than I think I might need in production, knowing that I could always push in a little bit like this in post. But you know, if you want a shot to be wider, then you're really stuck. Now let's look at one other example of reframing where I use the focal point. I had this shot of Tayani, and then we pushed in and got this shot. Now, one of the things that I didn't do great on set was that I didn't maintain the angles. You could see here, this is lower, and then this is higher. This is almost like looking down on Tayani. This is definitely looking up at Tayani. So we're kind of like down, looking up here, and again here we're up, almost like looking down a little bit, and that's not good. Another thing is that the focal point is over here. We're looking at Tayani because she starts talking, and then we cut to her, and then now the focal point, her eye, is right here. The eyes are very potent, and they gravitate, they pull a lot of attention to them. So it's not to say that the focal point in every scene is the eyes. So if there's a gargantuous explosion right here, or a huge monster or spider or something right here, that would definitely get our attention, and that probably would be the focal point. But in the absence of all of that other irregular stuff, we're going to be looking at the eyes. And so as we jump here, it creates a little bit of a jump cut almost. It's just really, these clips really don't go together. So what I did is I reframed this by scaling this up. Probably, let's try 120%. And then I can move this up and over. It's another cool thing about the aspect ratio. When you have those aspect ratio bars, you actually can lift this clip up a little bit more because those black bars are already there anyways. So I can kind of put this where I want it to be. And by scaling up this up and moving this over, oops, and then up, you could really get her eye in almost the exact same spot. And that makes this edit so much nicer. It's amazing how much better this plays back.
But she did.
This bar right here is messing us up, but if we had those aspect ratio bars, we wouldn't see that at all. And so now it kind of it compensates for the mess up in the camera angle snafu. We have a similar focal point, and this looks great. Another thing that I did for this particular shot, if it's of interest to you, is that I also scaled this up. Now, typically we don't want to scale things up in post-production because it fakes pushing in. But almost everything here, except for this underneath the bench way in the back here, almost everything here is on a very similar focal plane. So if we had an object in the extreme foreground, like if we could see Cordea's head right here, then we wouldn't want to scale this up. We wouldn't want to have this feel like we're pushing in because it would be a dead giveaway. But we can just a little bit. So I'll set a stopwatch for scale and go to the end of the clip, and maybe we'll just scale this up to like 125, just really, really subtle.
But she did. And that weighed heavily on her.
So the edit is better because the focal points line up a little bit better, and it feels more like we're just cutting in. It eliminates, because it's not as wide, it eliminates how obvious the camera mismatch angles are, and it just makes the edit so much smoother. So I love reframing stuff. I realize that this kind of looks like a pretty subtle difference, but this is kind of like the job of the editor. You know, we cut out fractions of seconds in the hopes that over time, the story as a whole is much better told. And, you know, cumulatively, all these little tiny adjustments make a film that is so much easier to watch and fully engage in.